Broadcasting from the Cass Corridor in Detroit, this is The Metro, a slice of news, culture, and conversation. I'm Tia Graham.
And I'm Robin Vincent. Today on the program, dating in the digital age has spurred some major shifts in how we meet people and how we behave in relationships.
How do we make these huge changes work for us? And is it possible to go back to a simpler time?
We'll sit down with an expert on social media and relational communication, a speed dating host, and an unofficial matchmaker. And we'll take your calls.
We want to know, have you found love in the world of digital dating?
But first, winter in Michigan is known by many of us as a time to hunker down and stay inside. But in a society that's navigating a lot of loneliness, isolation can cause more problems than it solves. In Southeast Michigan, there are people offering an alternative to that. Since 2015, therapist Dr. Zain Shamoun has been leading the Narratives of Pain nonprofit. In that space, he's hosted several events throughout the year, allowing people to share anguish and grief that they're feeling. Shamoun believes that allowing people to come together and share their stories and giving folks a place to be seen and heard allows for its own kind of healing.
That's right, Robin. Tomorrow, Narratives of Pain will host its Broken Hearts and Connections event at 6 p.m. at the Apothecary Espresso and Coffee Shop in Farmington. To discuss that event now, we have Shamoun here. Zain, welcome to the Metro.
Awesome. Thanks for having me.
Of course. So talk about what Narratives of Pain is and why you founded the organization.
Yeah, Narratives of Pain is healing through the witnessing and telling of stories. And I think a lot of people conventionally think about healing their traumas or, maybe attachment injuries or things that they've gone through that are hard as only being solvable or being able to come to a resolution if they go to therapy. And I'm a therapist myself. I value that very much. But I think a lot of our cultures and traditions also have to do with trusting that gathering and seeing each other has a healing and a developmental property to it. And there are a lot of people who, especially during the pandemic, were isolated from each other. So we started this back in 2015, and it was born out of the Muslim community because that's definitely a community that often feels disenfranchised or stigmatized out in the world and needs spaces that are for itself. But it's not just for that community; it's for everyone, and we've done it in many different places.
Yeah, thank you for that. So tomorrow's event is around the theme of broken hearts and connections. Why do you feel it necessary for people to come to explore love and loss on Valentine's Day of all days?
Yeah, I mean, it was kind of intentional, kind of not. It ended up being the day that was available. We were doing 4 shows at Apothecary Coffee. It's a wonderful coffee shop, by the way. They do lots of events. But I think a lot of people assume that, this is a time of connection and romance and all that. But I think a lot of people are reminded during this time of year of maybe what they've lost, whether it's loss through death or whether it's, ambiguous grief or, even when people move on from relationships, they're still left with the catalog of memories. And we often pathologize that and say, well, you haven't gotten over it or something like that. But I think it's also part of our heart to catalog those things that we care about. It's not just a symptom. And it's important for people to go to spaces where they get that message that when you remember somebody fondly, even if you're not with them anymore, even if something has moved on or something, it doesn't mean that you can't honor what's happened and find spaces to help you process that.
That's really have us sitting over here thinking right now, thinking about so many different things. Thank you for that as well. I think about people just holding space for one another, especially when they're just going through those emotional, I guess you can say, outages. Just trying to get that out and talk to people. So having a community and a group is great. So, Zain, logistically, how do you find people to come and share their stories in front of an audience they likely don't know?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think I just trust that people need to be seen and heard, and people need to gather. I think those are human needs. We often get the message that we got to get motivated on our own in isolation and just conjure up all the motivation to go and, tackle the world. But, isolation is a neighbor to depression. So it's important to gather. So I just trust that, number one. But number two, I think if you set it up right, it's that old saying, that old cheesy saying, if you build it, they'll come. I'm a big fan of the idea that when you're setting up a space like that, you don't solicit, hey, I need you to tell a story for our space. It's more like, hey, we're doing this thing. People are going to, get some things off their chest. We're going to set up some boundaries so that, storytellers aren't interrupted. Nobody's taking any photos of any storytellers without their permission or anything like that. We're just going to make sure that it's a safe environment. If you've got something you got to get off your chest, or even if you want to come support other people, hey, this is where we're doing it. And that's been the message for the last 10 years, and, people come. So.
You're listening to The Metro on WDET, Detroit Public Radio. I'm Tia Graham.
And I'm Robin Vincent. We're speaking with therapist Dr. Zane Shamoun. He's hosting an event called Narratives of Pain, where he gives people the opportunity to express their sorrow in a public space. That event is happening 6 p.m. at the Apothecary Espresso and Coffee Shop in Farmington tomorrow. Now, you've been hosting these events since 2015. I'm wondering what surprised you about them since starting the showcases.
When I originally started these out, me and my co-founder Hamad Ali, we really wanted to just try something new. How can people experience wellness or a therapeutic experience out in public, right? Or the private meets public. I think what surprised me is how much people said, we really need this. I mean, I think in retrospect, it doesn't surprise me. But when we first started, I thought this would be a good supplemental thing that people can do in their, wellness journey, or, it's an option for people. But it kind of took off in the sense that people are craving more of this. I mean, I myself have been reminded through these shows that I need to go and see people. I need to be around people. One of my favorite authors, Bell Hooks, talks about how community is actually the most important attachment in life. We often think it's romance, but it's actually being held by others and part of holding others. So I was really surprised by that, and I think the other part initially is I thought that the main thing would be the catharsis that the storyteller gets, getting something off their chest. But actually, there's a lot of people have expressed being there and witnessing and hearing other people be brave reminds them of their own path and their own story and their own needs. And that's something we often get diluted or get away from, is being reminded of our own needs. And so I think a lot of people who have attended who have not told stories said, hey, that was beneficial. I really appreciated witnessing somebody else. I want to come back to the next one. And just kind of really valuing that the witnessing aspect is also in its own right valuable just as much as sharing.
Zane, thank you for invoking the great bell hooks. I'm actually reading Teaching Community right now, and it's such a nice decompressing read, a great way to end my day on these colder, lonelier nights. I'm wondering if the storytelling, though, if it ever goes off the rails or gets awkward, if people have kind of stepped out of line and you've needed to hold them accountable in some way?
Yeah, that's a great question. So one of the main things that one of the main values that we hold at Narratives of Pain is that validation and agreement are not the same thing. As a therapist, I often will think about that concept a lot. If agreement and validation were the same thing, then my religion, my beliefs would change every session. Because when I'm affirming somebody, my job is to give them the dignity of their story and validate them. It means I see them, I hear them. I'm hearing them talk about their experience. They are the gatekeeper of their own story and life. And so when people come and they tell stories, one of the main sort of North Stars that we have with narratives, that's a message we say right at the beginning, that you might hear something that's so close to your reality that it causes a reaction, or you might hear something that's so different than your reality and your sensibility that causes a reaction. But in either case, we're not going to interrupt the storytellers. But hear something that, causes a reaction for whatever reason, we actually normalize coming and going from the show as people need. We let them know where the exits are, if they, at a coffee shop, if they need to get up and walk around. And that way storytellers know that they're not being walked out on, and we normalize that at the beginning of the show. So from that framework, we haven't really had something, go off the rails per se. There have been times where maybe we set up the event for a specific focus. Maybe we did one event that was for Palestinian voices only. And when we did that event, there was one storyteller who sort of forgot the rules and, got up on the stage and was from a different identity. But I think the audience and we kind of handled that warmly. We sort of just acknowledged it to him and clapped him out. But that's probably the extent of it. I think that, when people come to these events with sort of a antisocial or a reactionary mindset, we've had to worry about that, sure. Especially because these are often communities of color who come to these types of events and need to gather. It's for everyone, but it sort of attracts, that reclamation of gathering with your people. And when there's always a concern, is some sort of heckler going to come? Is somebody going to come to interrupt it? And, thankfully over the 10 years, I suppose just the way that we set it up and the way that we signal to the community what it is and what it's not, it's really been just about people who need to be heard. There are some times where somebody's highly emotional, recanting their story, and, may need to be checked on afterwards. So one of the other parameters that we put in place is that there are always 2 or 3 mental health professionals at the space. It's really important for people to know that this was set up by mental health professionals who know what they're doing, who have experience and knowledge and research behind, how they relate to human beings. And we then can check on that person and make sure they're safe without making it a spectacle or turning them into our client, right? And that takes a deft hand. And that's why we always have 2 or 3 mental health professionals in the space, just in case somebody needs a little follow-up or reprieve. And then finally, we, if we can, we try to do a check-in for people after the show, maybe the next day, maybe at the same coffee shop or something like that. But the rule is you're not allowed to comment or criticize the stories, but you can say, here's what was going on for me as I was listening, and I want that to be heard.
Thank you for creating this unique community space, a unique community space for mental health. Therapist Zane Shamoun will be hosting the Narratives of Pain event at 6 p.m. tomorrow at the Apothecary Espresso and Coffee Shop in Farmington. Zane, thanks for joining us on the Metro.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me this morning.
From the WDET Newsroom, the city of Detroit is offering overnight shelters for residents who need it during the cold and snowy weather. One is at Detroit Rescue Mission Ministries on Woodward Avenue. The other is at the Pope Francis Center on West Hancock. Officials also want people who need emergency housing to call the cold weather hotline at 866-313-2520. That is 866-313-2520. They can also go to any police precinct after 6 p.m. where officers will put them in touch with someone who can help them find overnight services. The mayor's office issued these reminders after 2 children apparently froze to death while living in a van parked near Hollywood Casino.
Up next, we chat with this year's Kresge Eminent Artist, bassist Marian Hayden, about her career and fostering the next generation of jazz musicians. This is the Metro on WDET. Stay with us.